camp. It shows already, let's say, the seriousness of your life. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Thank you, Professor, for inviting me to come to the World Economic Forum. It was difficult to get me here, and that speaks of the story of my life. My name is Mohamed Hassan, and I am a refugee from Kakuma Refugee Camp in Kenya. And I've been in that camp for more than 20 years of my life, and after Davos, I go back to that camp. And I don't live in that camp by myself. I live with 185,000 other refugees from 10 different nationalities. People hear the word refugees and they think it's only immediate problems, that people run and they need immediate shelter. But what happens to the forgotten refugees? Those of us who are in the camps for decades, those that people would rather not talk about and pretend that we don't exist. I come from that place, and I believe it's crucial we have more voices like me involved in the discussions about globalization and moving forward. People talk about ethical and sustainable development. What does that mean to me? Refugee camps are not ethical, they are not sustainable, they are not fit, and they are not conducive for human growth. People want to be ethical to robots. They want to discuss those solving death. And we don't want to focus on the human suffering. For some people, it's easier to move around. My mother, Deka Abdullahi, after my father was killed in the civil war in Somalia, tribal violence, she was in the camp. She made bread, she baked, and she sold it for 5 shillings. So that me and my siblings could have a life, so that we could go to school. And she always wanted more for us. She wanted to get out of the camp. She wanted to move around. After 27 years, she died in the camp recently, about 15 months ago. And that is what keeps me up at night. Will I also die in that camp? Will my siblings, the one who's 10 years old, will he be there for the next 18 years? What happens to us? Why are people so afraid to open their doors and to let us in? We're not animals, we're not criminals. I don't think it's fair, and I shouldn't have to beg for that, you know? And where I come from in that camp, I'm a community leader. And growing up in that camp, I've had to make an active choice. I had to choose, especially after the death of my mother, about how I wanted to frame my story, about the kind of life that I wanted to lead, whether to have a victimhood mentality, to have self-pity and to feel sorry for myself, or to stand up and be counted. I decided to stand up. I am a community leader, I am a refugee advocate, and I'm also a global shaper. And I work with fellow refugees. And what we do basically is preserving hope. So we're trying to stay alive. And it's hard for some people to understand that, living in confinement and uncertainty, not knowing where you will go. It's difficult. And on a day-to-day basis, that's what I do with my fellow refugees. We have talented people who are denied access to humanity. People don't want to open the doors, and we feel unwanted, and no one really cares. So please, as you go, the next couple of days, as you attend the meetings and as people discuss great, lofty ideas, think about those of us who are on the sidelines, watching in. We're not asking for much. I'm just looking for a place to call home. Thank you.
I was thinking, how did that inspiration come? How did you take action? But really, the thing that I would say I'm most curious to hear from you is, what advice would you have for leaders like me, for leaders like Professor Schwab, and the leaders in this room? What should we do to architect this next phase of globalization so that the initiatives, the vision you have for a better future is going to be fulfilled? Maybe you can start, Mohamed.
In my context, as coming from a refugee camp and growing up in that camp, I'd like people to think about the fact that money, capital, and goods move around the world very easily, and yet people can't move in decades. So how do we go away from keeping people in camps where we have the idea is fostered on dependency on aid, and you just have a sack and you're waiting for food at the end of the month, and that's not sustainable. How do we go from that to making people self-reliant, to giving them skills and marketable skills and higher education so that they can make a life for themselves? And I think the private sector, it's not only government responsibilities, but I also think that the government can look at the camps. Like the place I come from, 185,000 refugees. We finish high school, and then what do we do? We're just sitting idling in the camps. And I think we're human beings, and we have the potential, the capacity to do more, and we'd love to do more if we're given access. So it basically comes down to access. It's access and equal opportunity, access to higher education, marketable skills, and also provide like legal pathways for durable solutions, you know? Make things easier, make it easier for me to move, to travel, so that maybe someday, hopefully, I can come back to Davos once again. So that's yeah. So for me, the private sector, in hand with global leaders and governments, they can step up and also address the issues that are happening back in our countries of origin. Like I come from Somalia originally, so make it safe and make it peaceful for me to be able to one day go back to my country, but also so that gives me the tools I need to make a life for myself in the camp and make it easier for me to access opportunities out of the camp. That's my idea. Yeah, I would say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Continue. So for me, every global leaders needs to be localized.
Between business, governments, and I should add, the wonderful young generation. Thank you very much for having participated at this opening session. I wish you a very good annual meeting 2019.